Hello everyone and welcome to Hill Street. Today's story is, If I Stayed Still, Would She Hold Me Too? By Scared of Cthulhu. If you end up enjoying this story, please leave a like. And if you enjoy hearing stories from me, please subscribe and become a resident of Hill Street and let me know how I'm doing in the comments. Now, let's get to this nightmare. It couldn't have been earlier than noon. The sky was white, the sun nowhere to be seen, making the barren, snow-covered cornfields and the country dirt road that made up the stretch of the horizon blend in with the sky. The only break in all that monotony, barely visible through the wicked barrage of snow, was a strong oak tree bending in the wind. The wind howled against our house, and the century-old wooden beams screamed and creaked in protest, as if they were arguing with each other. It was an eerie cacophony that hadn't let up since the baby arrived. It had felt like God was angry at us and was trying to wipe out the blight on his earth that was our family. In my Christian upbringing, fueled by faith born of fear and deep respect for the Almighty, it had never occurred to me that there were things he could not forgive, things that simply must be washed away, buried and forgotten under the pure, unforgiving witness. I pressed my hand against the window, letting my warmth leak into the icy glass panes. Again, my mind strays to the single phone down in the kitchen. The damn telephone line couldn't even withstand a butterfly landing on it, let alone the onslaught it's taking right now. The phone's small, rectangular buttons were completely unresponsive to my frantic fingers repeatedly typing 911. Under the clamor of creak and howl, I heard soft creaking. Dread snakes through me and pooled at the bottom of my stomach as I realized it was my mother shuffling down the hallway towards my room. It was a sharp, bittersweet contrast to the constant longing I felt for the person she used to be. She still had the warm brown eyes and silky black hair, but I was still longing, almost mourning, for the smell of cigarettes and cookies as she pulled me into her warm embrace. The door creaked open, and the smell of rot instantly flooded the room. It shoved its way up my nostrils and sent disgust rolling through my body in a debilitating wave. It took every bit of my willpower not to run over my mother, smack that thing out of her hands, and scream until she was back to normal. Only one thought kept me rooted where I was. What would she do to you after that? What was she capable of? How much of her humanity is left, and what would be enough to stop her from harming you? If she killed you, would she hold on to you too? Hi, my girl. My mom greeted me cheerfully, closing the door behind her with another creak. Hi, Mom. The words came out strangled and awkward. I turned around to look at her and clenched my fist, my nails finding their way home into the painfully carved, crescent-shaped grooves in my palm. Her eyes were red, and the flesh surrounding them were puffy and flushed. She had been crying. What are you doing up here all by yourself? Your brother misses you. She bobbed him up playfully. I just woke up. I lied. Well, if you don't mind, I have a job for you, she said. What must I do now for you, "My liege," I joked, despite everything. She laughed. It was rough, a hollow shell of her usual crow-like guffaw. But it was real. "I need you to watch your brother for me." Every muscle in my body was pulled taut, bristled with fear, and frozen in shock. She took my silence as an acceptance and started walking towards me. It felt like she was pushing the wall of funk towards me, closing me in, and something in me snapped. "Stop!" I yelled. Seeing her flinch shocked me back to my senses. "Sorry, I just think I'm too tired to hold him. Where are you going anyway? What are you so scared for? Your brother has been here for a week, and you haven't so much as touched him yet. About time you two get to know each other." She replied, "Besides, I need someone to watch him while I'm making breakfast. I don't think I'm strong enough to hold him. I mean, I'm afraid I'll drop him." I stammered out. It was almost scary how easy it was to reach for a new lie. "Oh, honey, how sweet of you. You can just sit down while you hold him," she said. "Oh, all right, come on," she said, shuffling towards my bed and gesturing to it with her head, all while looking at me. "Sit down here, and I'll hand you your brother." I dragged my leaden limbs to my bed and sat down slowly, as if my actions would prevent anything that was about to happen. Time seemed to slow down as my mother bent down to place him in my lap. I was frozen. My heart was galloping in my chest, and it seemed to echo throughout the rest of my body. Bile was rising in my throat. "Go on, cradle him," she said, despite everything in me screaming at me to stop. I rested my hands on top of him. I sent a silent prayer to my wrathful God that he had a towel wrapped around him. She laughed. "No, like this. It's important that you cradle his head." She grabbed a hold of my wrist, and I almost flinched. I don't know what I had expected. Maybe I had expected her flesh to be cold, stiff. Maybe when she touched me, I would wake up from this nightmare and her belly would still be swollen with my brother safely inside. But it felt normal, completely anticlimactically normal. She carefully adjusted my arms so that one elbow cradled his head, and my hand rested near his feet. My other hand rested rather uselessly on top of him. She stepped back, admiring her work. She frowned. "You haven't even looked at him." "Yes, I have," I said. "No, you haven't. I've been watching you. Look at him. That's your brother," she said, voice starting to rise in anger. Slowly, I wrenched my gaze down to my brother's face. His eyes were closed. His face was drained of blood, with tiny blue veins painfully visible under his pale skin. There were small tears in his flesh, dusted over his gray skin, each completely devoid of any blood, I realized. As to where they came from, I hadn't a clue. With disgust, I noticed his skin was the same shade as the winter sky. The flesh at the back of his head and neck, where blood had settled, was a deep purple. I didn't need to peel the towel back to know he hadn't moved since he was born. We had learned about rigor mortis in my health class. "I'll go make breakfast," my mom said, shuffling out of the door. I couldn't manage a response. I couldn't look away from my brother. It felt like passing a car crash on the road. It was horrible. You felt bad for the people involved. but you had to stare. You had to know. Hours had passed. Hours my mom had spent making breakfast. It took me more than half an hour to work up the nerve to walk downstairs. It took me even longer to work my way downstairs, adjusting to the impossible heavy weight of my infant brother. As soon as I walked out of my room, there was no smell of food. When I got to the kitchen, there were no pans out, nothing. But the door to the basement was cracked open, and light gleamed softly through the crack. Apprehension and fear flooded any feelings I'd had of disgust. I started hesitantly down the stairs to the basement. Whatever waited for me down there, I knew I didn't want to see. I was almost content with going back to the kitchen and waiting for her to come back up. But I knew that wasn't going to be possible. Not when I heard a soft creaking sound under the clamor of creak and howl. There was an overturned chair on the ground. One end of a rope was secured to an exposed beam in the roof of the basement. On the other end of the rope, my mother was swinging slightly. Despite what had to be bruises from the rope on her neck, she looked normal. She looked like my mother. Part of me almost believed she was sleepwalking. I dropped my brother. He landed hard on the stairs, and beneath my shock, I dimly registered the sound of him toppling down the rest of the stairs. When I finally decided to pick up my brother as some sort of act of penance to my now dead mother, I noticed the ridiculous amount of blood near his head and the trail he had left on the stairs. There were spots and splatters on most steps, undoubtedly from the impact, and a conscious line all the way down to where he had landed. Small chunks gleam like rubies in the basement light on the small puddles of blood on the wooden stairs. A small ivory chunk of something streaked in red. Skull, 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 and brain matter. This was the final straw. The last thing I remember that day was throwing up immediately afterward and falling asleep on the stairs, unable to leave my family behind. After that, I left only for bathroom breaks and water. I couldn't bring myself to eat. I was discovered a month later after the roads were deemed safe for travel, and my brother's father came to check on him, as required in court. The events carved a hole in me that I've carried for over 30, almost 40 years now. This is my third time ever telling the story, once to my father, once to the police, and now to you. I don't know why this was so comforting. Maybe because I took creative liberties with it. Maybe because for those years I had created horrific stories, hoping to lose myself in one of them thoroughly enough to forget my brother and our mom. My therapist pointed out that I was only running from it, but who could I tell? Who would listen and not think of me differently afterward? What was the point in saying it out loud again? Telling my story through a medium as fickle and temporary as one other person's memory. Whether 3 people see it or 3 million, whether it's well written or not, it's out there. I won't be proofreading it. Now that it's written down and permanent, I will never revisit these words. Take what you want from this story, dear reader. I'll be taking the dirt of my freedom and use it to fill up that damned hole. Thank you.